The neighborhood looked like the kind of place that appeared on real estate brochures. Perfect sidewalks stretched beneath rows of maple trees. Every lawn was trimmed with military precision, and identical mailboxes stood in neat formation along the streets. Visitors often believed the community represented fairness, security, and opportunity. The polished appearance suggested that everyone who lived behind those gates enjoyed the same privileges. The truth was hidden behind carefully written policies. Westbrook Heights was governed by one of the strictest homeowners associations in the county. The HOA proudly advertised luxury amenities that justified its expensive monthly dues. The swimming pools sparkled year-round. The clubhouse hosted elegant events. Tennis courts stayed freshly painted, and the community gym had recently undergone a renovation costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Every resident contributed toward those improvements. Every resident expected equal access. Not every resident received it. Among the homeowners was 46-year-old Daniel Carter, a quiet widower who had purchased his modest townhouse nearly 8 years earlier. Daniel had never cared much about luxury. After spending over 2 decades working as a paramedic, he appreciated simple things: peaceful mornings, respectful neighbors, and a safe place where his 17-year-old daughter Emily could finish high school without worrying about crime or instability. Life had already demanded enough sacrifices from them. 5 years earlier, Daniel had lost his wife, Rachel, after a long battle with cancer. Since then, every decision centered around rebuilding stability. Medical bills had nearly emptied their savings, yet Daniel refused to sell the home Rachel had loved. Instead, he worked overtime shifts, accepted weekend emergencies, and quietly repaired everything around the house himself to avoid hearing contractors. Emily watched every sacrifice. She knew every late-night shift represented another tuition payment. She knew every skipped vacation meant another year of financial recovery. Neither of them complained. When Westbrook Heights announced a complete renovation of its fitness center, Daniel actually welcomed the increased HOA assessment. Exercise had become one of the few healthy ways he managed stress after years of witnessing medical emergencies. Having a modern gym only a few minutes from home felt like one small reward after countless exhausting nights. The renovation lasted nearly 9 months. Residents received glossy newsletters showcasing imported equipment, professional trainers, private yoga studios, smart lockers, massage recovery rooms, and biometric security systems. The HOA board described the project as an investment in every homeowner's health. Those words would later become painfully ironic. The grand reopening arrived on a bright Saturday morning. Families gathered outside the clubhouse while board members smiled beside ribbon-cutting decorations. Local photographers captured images for newsletters and social media. Volunteers handed out refreshments while upbeat music echoed through the parking lot. Daniel arrived with Emily shortly after the ceremony began. She had recently started preparing for college entrance exams and hoped regular exercise would help reduce stress. Daniel had promised they would establish a routine together. For the first time in months, both seemed genuinely excited. After waiting patiently in line, Daniel approached the reception desk. A young employee scanned his homeowner identification card. Instead of handing back 2 access bracelets, the receptionist frowned at her computer. She checked the screen again. Then another employee walked over. The second employee whispered something before disappearing into a nearby office. Daniel assumed the computer system simply needed updating after the renovation. Several minutes passed. Residents behind him entered without delay. Finally, a woman wearing an HOA administration badge emerged carrying a clipboard. She smiled politely, but her eyes lacked warmth. After confirming Daniel's address, she explained that his household currently held only basic community access. Daniel looked confused. Westbrook Heights had never offered different access levels. Every homeowner paid the same mandatory HOA dues. He calmly pointed this out. The administrator nodded, as though she'd rehearsed the explanation dozens of times. She informed him that after the renovation, several amenities, including the upgraded fitness center, had been placed under a premium wellness membership. Daniel asked how much that membership cost. The answer caught him completely off guard. $300 every month, separate from HOA dues. He stared silently for several seconds. Surely there had been some misunderstanding. He had already contributed thousands toward the renovation through mandatory assessments. Now he was expected to pay hundreds more simply to enter a facility his dues had financed. The administrator handed him a glossy brochure filled with smiling stock photos and elegant slogans about exclusive wellness experiences. Nothing inside explained why homeowners who funded construction were suddenly excluded. Daniel politely asked where this policy had been approved. She referred him to the HOA board. He requested copies of the meeting minutes. She suggested submitting a written records request. Everything felt strangely rehearsed. As Daniel stepped aside, another resident approached the counter. His card scanned immediately. Within seconds, he received full access. Another family entered. Then another. Most never experienced delays. Emily quietly noticed something Daniel had been too distracted to recognize. Nearly everyone receiving instant access lived in the newer luxury section of Westbrook Heights. Those homes were worth nearly twice as much as the older townhouses. She didn't say anything immediately. Instead, she simply watched. By the time they returned to the parking lot, disappointment had replaced excitement. Daniel tried hiding his frustration. He suggested finding another gym in town. Emily nodded politely, though she knew private memberships would stretch their already careful budget. The issue wasn't merely money anymore. It was principle. Over the following week, Daniel began reading every HOA document he had saved over the years. Declarations, bylaws, financial reports, meeting notices, assessment letters. Nothing mentioned premium wellness memberships. Nothing authorized restricting facilities based on optional payments. Even stranger, the renovation assessment clearly described the gym as a common community amenity available to all homeowners. That sentence kept drawing his attention. Something wasn't adding up. Daniel submitted a formal records request, asking for every board meeting discussing the new membership structure. Days passed. No response. He emailed again. Still nothing. Finally, after repeated follow-ups, the HOA manager replied with a short message stating the records would be available within 30 business days. 30 days seemed unusually long for documents homeowners legally had a right to inspect. Meanwhile, rumors quietly spread through the neighborhood. Several residents privately admitted they also couldn't access the gym. Most lived in the older townhouse section. Some were retirees living on fixed incomes. Others were single parents. A few had recently purchased homes, believing community amenities were included. Everyone shared similar stories. Everyone had assumed they were alone. An elderly veteran explained that he had been embarrassed after being turned away in front of younger residents. A nurse working night shifts admitted she canceled plans to improve her health because she couldn't justify another monthly payment. A schoolteacher confessed she simply stopped trying after being told she had the wrong membership. The pattern became impossible to ignore. This wasn't affecting random homeowners. It overwhelmingly affected residents from the less expensive part of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, wealthier homeowners seemed completely unaware anything had changed. Daniel began organizing everyone's experiences into a folder. Dates, emails, assessment invoices, copies of governing documents, photographs of promotional materials promising equal amenities. The folder grew thicker every evening. Emily watched her father transform from a quiet man who avoided conflict into someone determined to uncover the truth. She recognized the same determination he'd shown while fighting to save patients during medical emergencies. He wasn't driven by anger. He was driven by fairness. One Thursday afternoon, while walking past the clubhouse after work, Daniel noticed maintenance workers unloading brand new exercise equipment from a delivery truck. Curious, he walked toward the loading area. One worker casually mentioned the equipment had been purchased using the community reserve fund. Daniel immediately recognized the significance. Reserve funds came from every homeowner's HOA dues, not premium membership fees. That single comment connected another missing piece. If every homeowner funded the equipment, why were only certain homeowners allowed to use it? The question refused to leave his mind. Later that evening, he opened his laptop and searched state HOA laws regarding common amenities, equal access, and governing authority. What he discovered would completely change the direction of the fight. Because buried inside state statutes was a legal principle the HOA board apparently hoped no homeowner would ever read. And if Daniel understood it correctly, Westbrook Heights wasn't simply treating residents unfairly. It might have built an entire membership system that violated the very laws governing homeowners associations. With fresh determination, Daniel closed his laptop, looked at the growing folder on his kitchen table, and realized this was no longer about a gym. It had become a fight over whether ordinary homeowners could be forced to pay twice for rights they already owned. Daniel barely slept after discovering the state statutes. For years, he had trusted that if something seemed unfair, there was probably an explanation hidden somewhere in the paperwork. Now, for the first time, he began to suspect the opposite. Maybe the paperwork had been written precisely so ordinary homeowners would never question it. The next morning, before leaving for his shift, he highlighted several passages from the state's Homeowners Association laws. One section immediately caught his attention. Common elements funded by mandatory assessments generally had to remain equally available to all members unless the governing documents explicitly authorized restrictions. Daniel reread the sentence several times. Westbrook Heights' governing documents contained no such authorization. The HOA had created an entirely new membership system after collecting renovation fees from every homeowner. Something wasn't just unfair. It appeared inconsistent with the very documents that govern the neighborhood. Still, Daniel knew assumptions wouldn't win anything. Evidence would. That weekend, instead of relaxing, he knocked on doors throughout the townhouse section. Many homeowners hesitated at first. Nobody wanted conflict with the HOA. Everyone had heard stories about residents who questioned board decisions and suddenly received violation notices over tiny landscaping issues or mailbox paint colors. Fear had become part of daily life. But Daniel wasn't asking anyone to fight. He simply wanted facts. Little by little, neighbors began opening up. Retired accountant Harold Benson pulled out every HOA invoice he'd received over the past 3 years. Every payment included the renovation assessment. Single mother Jasmine Reed showed Daniel emails asking why she couldn't enter the gym despite paying all required dues. The responses had been vague and almost identical. A young firefighter named Marcus explained that he had assumed his access card malfunctioned until another resident quietly mentioned the premium list. An elderly couple admitted they had stopped walking past the clubhouse altogether because being turned away had become too embarrassing. The stories differed only in small details. The pattern remained exactly the same. Within 2 weeks, Daniel had documented 23 nearly identical experiences. Emily helped organize everything. She created spreadsheets comparing addresses, HOA payment histories, access denials, and property values. When the information appeared side by side, something startling emerged. Nearly every homeowner denied gym access lived in the original phase of Westbrook Heights. Nearly every homeowner with unrestricted access owned homes built during the luxury expansion, completed 6 years earlier. No official document mentioned those neighborhoods. Yet the data spoke for itself. Emily stared at the spreadsheet. It can't be a coincidence. Daniel didn't answer. He simply kept highlighting rows. The evidence continued growing. At the next monthly HOA board meeting, the clubhouse filled with more residents than anyone could remember. Normally, only 6 or 7 homeowners attended. That evening, over 60 filled the room. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel sat quietly near the front. He carried no signs, made no speeches. His folder rested calmly on the table beside him. When public comments began, he stood. Instead of accusing anyone, he asked a simple question. When exactly did the association vote to create premium wellness memberships? The board president smiled politely. She thanked him for his question. Then she avoided answering it. Instead, she explained that the board possessed broad authority to improve community services. Daniel asked again. What meeting approved restricting homeowner access to the gym? Another board member answered this time. He claimed operational decisions didn't always require homeowner approval. Again, the question remained unanswered. The audience noticed. Several residents exchanged confused looks. Daniel asked one final time. Would the board please identify the specific section of our governing documents authorizing homeowners to be charged twice for the same amenity? Silence. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, the HOA attorney intervened. He suggested discussing legal matters privately rather than during an open meeting. That response changed the atmosphere inside the room. People began whispering. If everything was legitimate, why couldn't anyone answer such a straightforward question? The board abruptly ended public comments. The meeting moved on to flower beds and parking permits, as though nothing had happened. But everyone in the audience knew something had changed. For the first time, the board looked uncomfortable. 3 days later, Daniel received his long-delayed records request. The box contained hundreds of pages. Meeting agendas, financial reports, contracts, invoices, committee recommendations. Emily spread everything across the dining room table. The search began. Hour after hour, they examined every page. Eventually, Emily stopped turning papers. Look at this. Daniel leaned over. It was the agenda from the meeting, where the renovated gym had supposedly been approved. The renovation budget appeared. Equipment purchases appeared. Construction contracts appeared. Premium memberships did not. They checked the official meeting minutes. Nothing. Another meeting. Nothing. Another. Still nothing. The policy everyone was now being forced to follow had never appeared in any recorded board vote. Either the decision had never been formally approved, or someone had failed to document it. Neither possibility reflected well on the HOA. Meanwhile, rumors spread throughout Westbrook Heights. Residents began comparing access cards. Some noticed identical homeowner accounts produced different permissions. Others questioned why mandatory assessments continued increasing despite premium membership revenue. Questions multiplied faster than answers. The HOA responded by sending a neighborhood newsletter praising its successful wellness initiative. Curiously, the newsletter never mentioned premium memberships. Instead, it highlighted photographs showing smiling residents exercising together. Most of those pictured lived in the luxury section. The omission didn't go unnoticed. A week later, Daniel experienced something unexpected. Returning home after work, he found a violation notice taped to his front door. According to the HOA, His garbage bin had remained visible 12 hours beyond collection time. Daniel looked around. Half the street still had bins outside. Only his house had received a notice. He photographed everything. 2 days later came another violation. Apparently, one shrub required trimming. The following week, another. A garden ornament allegedly violated landscaping standards, despite remaining untouched for years. Emily recognized the pattern immediately. They're trying to distract you. Daniel wasn't sure, but he documented every notice anyway. The folder kept growing. One evening, while reviewing financial statements online, Emily discovered something else. The HOA's annual budget listed gym maintenance under mandatory operating expenses, not premium membership revenue. Every homeowner continued paying utilities, equipment maintenance, insurance, and staffing costs through regular HOA dues. Premium fees appeared nowhere. Daniel contacted the community's former treasurer, who had moved away the previous year. The retired accountant agreed to meet over coffee. Their conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. The former treasurer revealed something astonishing. During his final months on the board, several directors had discussed creating exclusive amenities to increase luxury property values. He remembered objecting. The gym, pool, and clubhouse belonged to everyone. Creating financial barriers would divide the community. Soon afterward, he resigned. He never learned what happened next. Before leaving, he handed Daniel copies of several old committee reports. One paragraph immediately stood out. The renovated fitness center shall remain a common amenity funded through association assessments. Daniel read it twice, then a third time. Another important piece had fallen into place. Word of Daniel's investigation eventually reached residents in the luxury section. Surprisingly, many weren't angry with him. They were angry with the board. Several admitted they had assumed everyone possessed equal access because they had never been told otherwise. One businessman expressed genuine embarrassment after realizing neighbors had been excluded for months. A physician apologized to Daniel personally. "If we're all paying for it," she said, "everyone should be able to use it." Support began crossing neighborhood lines. The board had counted on dividing homeowners. Instead, homeowners were beginning to unite. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. Late one Friday afternoon, Daniel received an anonymous envelope. No return address. No note. Inside sat a small USB flash drive. Emily plugged it into an old laptop, disconnected from the internet. Several audio files appeared. One recording was labeled simply, "Board Executive Session." Daniel hesitated. Executive sessions were confidential. Listening felt uncomfortable. But curiosity won. As the recording played, voices slowly filled the room. Board members discussed the renovated gym. One sentence froze Daniel where he sat. A voice clearly stated that limiting access would protect the investment by creating amenities that mainly benefited owners of higher-value homes. Another voice worried about legal challenges. Someone else dismissed the concern, insisting that most townhouse owners can't afford attorneys anyway. The room fell completely silent. Emily looked at her father in disbelief. Months of suspicion suddenly transformed into something far more serious. The board hadn't accidentally created an unfair system. According to the recording, at least some members appeared fully aware of what they were doing. Daniel carefully copied the files without altering the originals. He knew anonymous evidence required verification. Handled incorrectly, it could become useless. Handled correctly, it might expose everything. For the first time since being turned away from the gym, Daniel realized the fight was no longer about proving discrimination existed. Now he needed to determine the safest, most effective way to reveal the truth, before the HOA realized someone on the inside had started talking. Daniel sat quietly at the kitchen table long after Emily had gone to bed. The USB drive rested beside his folder, surrounded by months of documents, photographs, spreadsheets, meeting minutes, violation notices, and financial reports. Every page represented another piece of a puzzle that now formed a clear picture. Still, he refused to rush. After 23 years as a paramedic, he had learned an important lesson. Acting too quickly often created new problems. Facts mattered. Procedures mattered. The truth had the greatest power when presented carefully. The anonymous recording might reveal intent, but it wasn't enough by itself. It needed support. It needed context. Most importantly, it needed to be verified. The following week, Daniel scheduled consultations with 2 attorneys experienced in homeowners association law. Rather than presenting accusations, he simply asked them to review the governing documents, financial records, meeting minutes, and state statutes. Both attorneys reached remarkably similar conclusions. The mandatory assessments had funded the gym renovation. The governing documents identified the fitness center as a common community amenity. No recorded board vote authorized creating exclusive memberships. The attorneys also expressed concern about the pattern of selective enforcement reflected in Daniel's growing collection of violation notices. One attorney summarized it simply. When homeowners pay for common property through mandatory assessments, restricting access without proper authority creates significant legal risk for an association. That confirmation strengthened Daniel's confidence. The second attorney suggested one more step before filing any lawsuit. Send the HOA a formal demand letter. Give the board an opportunity to correct its actions voluntarily. Daniel agreed. He had never wanted a courtroom battle. He wanted fairness. Nothing more. The demand letter arrived at the HOA management office on a Monday morning. It included copies of governing documents, financial statements, state statutes, meeting records, resident declarations, evidence showing that mandatory dues continued funding gym operations. The letter requested only 4 things: immediate restoration of equal gym access, suspension of premium wellness membership restrictions, correction of any retaliation against homeowners who questioned the policy, independent review of board actions. The HOA had 14 days to respond. Instead of answering the letter, the board scheduled an emergency executive meeting. Word spread quickly throughout Westbrook Heights. Residents sensed something significant was happening. The clubhouse parking lot filled with neighbors discussing everything they had learned during recent months. People who had barely spoken before were now exchanging documents and comparing experiences. The community had changed. Fear had slowly been replaced by solidarity. 3 days later, Daniel received another violation notice. This time, the HOA claimed his house number was the wrong shade of black. Emily laughed in disbelief. Even neighbors who had previously remained silent recognized how unreasonable the citations had become. Several homeowners photographed their own identical house numbers. No one else received notices. The evidence of retaliation had become impossible to ignore. Then something unexpected happened. A member of the HOA Finance Committee resigned publicly. In a letter shared with homeowners, she explained that transparency had disappeared from board operations and that decisions affecting all residents were increasingly being made without meaningful discussion. She didn't mention the gym directly. She didn't need to. Everyone understood. Within 48 hours, another committee member resigned. Then another. Confidence in the board was rapidly collapsing. The board finally responded to Daniel's attorney. Their letter denied wrongdoing. They insisted the premium wellness membership represented a voluntary enhancement rather than unequal treatment. However, they still failed to identify any governing document authorizing the policy. Nor did they explain why common operating expenses continued coming from mandatory dues. The response raised more questions than answers. Daniel's attorney recommended moving forward. A formal lawsuit was filed on behalf of Daniel and 29 additional homeowners. The case sought equal access to common amenities, reimbursement of improperly collected membership fees, and an injunction preventing discriminatory restrictions. Local newspapers quickly noticed the unusual dispute. Television stations soon followed. Reporters found the story compelling. Residents who had paid to build their own community gym, only to be charged again before entering. The story spread throughout the region. Legal experts interviewed by local media explained that homeowners associations possess broad authority, but that authority still has limits. Communities cannot simply ignore their own governing documents. Public attention intensified. Suddenly, Westbrook Heights became known for something far different than beautiful landscaping. As legal discovery began, thousands of internal emails and records were exchanged. Among them were communications that painted an uncomfortable picture. Some board members had openly discussed increasing luxury home values by creating exclusive experiences. Others worried that equal access would attract too many users from the townhouse section. Several emails suggested homeowners in older neighborhoods were less likely to challenge questionable decisions because of limited financial resources. Reading those messages shocked even residents who had once defended the board. The community realized this had never been about managing overcrowding. It had been about creating social divisions inside a neighborhood where everyone paid the same mandatory dues. Months later, mediation began. The HOA's insurance carrier encouraged settlement rather than risking a lengthy public trial. After several days of negotiations, an agreement was reached. The terms represented a complete reversal of the HOA's position. The premium wellness membership was permanently eliminated. Every homeowner immediately received equal access to the gym. Residents who had paid additional membership fees received refunds. The HOA also agreed to reimburse a substantial portion of Daniel's legal expenses. Perhaps most importantly, an independent governance consultant would review board procedures to ensure future decisions complied with governing documents and state law. The selective violation notices issued against Daniel were withdrawn. Several board members resigned before the agreement became official. Special elections were scheduled. For the first time in years, homeowners showed overwhelming interest in serving their community. People who had once stayed silent now believed their voices mattered. On the morning the gym officially reopened under equal access, there was no ribbon-cutting ceremony. No photographers. No speeches. Residents simply arrived. Some came before work. Others brought children. Retirees exercised alongside young professionals. Neighbors who had barely known each other exchanged smiles and introductions. The building finally served the purpose everyone had paid for. Daniel entered quietly. He scanned his homeowner card. The green light flashed. The gate opened instantly. No delays. No separate membership. No questions. Emily walked beside him. They stood for a moment, looking across the room filled with equipment every homeowner had helped purchase. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The moment itself said everything. Nearby, Harold, the retired accountant, completed his first workout in nearly a year. Jasmine smiled as she finished a treadmill session before heading to work. Marcus spotted neighbors while lifting weights. The elderly veteran, who had once been embarrassed at the front desk, proudly greeted newcomers as they entered. The atmosphere felt completely different. Not because the equipment had changed, because fairness had returned. Several months later, Westbrook Heights looked much the same from the outside. The sidewalks remained spotless. The trees still lined every street. The lawns stayed perfectly trimmed. But something deeper had changed. Board meetings became well attended. Financial reports were carefully reviewed. Residents asked thoughtful questions. Transparency replaced assumptions. People no longer believed that silence protected communities. They understood that accountability did. Daniel never considered himself an activist. He never sought attention. He simply refused to accept that ordinary people should pay twice for something they already owned. His persistence reminded an entire neighborhood that fairness often depends on one person being willing to ask a simple question. Not out of anger, but out of principle. Because real communities are not measured by how beautiful they appear from the outside. They are measured by whether every person inside the gates is treated with the same dignity, the same respect, and the same rights. And in Westbrook Heights, the gym doors remained open to every homeowner, not because generosity had finally appeared, but because justice had finally walked through them first.